Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition and week of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning into today's show. What a weekend it was. NFL Week 1 is almost over. Monday Night Football, of course, between the Jets and the 49ers. Tune into that. But overall, what a crazy weekend. And I'm just here to try to make sense of it. In fantasy football terms, a lot of different storylines that we could talk about, whether it be savvy veterans doing their thing, shocking new surprises, upsets galore, get-right games, because we're not just looking at the NFL, we're looking at college football as well. So this is just going to be an all-encompassing episode looking at some of my fantasy winners and losers from the weekend, just trying to parse through some of the performances that stood out, whether positively or negatively. So hopefully you guys enjoy this show. I know I definitely enjoyed this weekend of sports. Finally, both NFL and college football together at last. But before we get into any of the excitement, I do want to remind you yet again that since we are now a live show, you can like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. Anything you do for the network, me, my fellow podcasters especially, is greatly appreciated. Also, keep availing yourselves to the features that YouTube has to offer, whether it be through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, or Super Stickers features. You can find many ways to contribute to the show. It's not all about me. It's all about you, my faithful audience. Whether you have any questions, comments, or concerns, tips, or donations to leave, anything you do helps the show, helps the network. So keep on doing what you've been doing, and let's continue to have exciting shows in the present and in the future as well. But without further ado, let's jump right into today's show. Let's start off in the world of QBs. There were a lot of different storylines in the world of football, but especially at the quarterback position. A lot of new youthful rookies, a lot of shocking performances, and like I said, a lot of guys who expect to perform did their thing and performed. So this weekend really was not necessarily, the biggest testing ground for all of these guys, because some of these guys, when we talking about whether positively or negatively, either had an easy go of things or due to fate of circumstance might not have performed up to par, up to the level we know that they can. But this is the situation week 1. Really exciting stuff. So let's talk about the winners first, because the losers wasn't necessarily pretty for most of them. So let's talk about the fantasy winners first and foremost. Let's start off with a guy who really expects to be at the top of fantasy football tiers by the end of the year. Always competing for the NFL MVP. Still hasn't won it yet, but this could be his year in a new look offense where he himself is going to drive this team to success, where he really now has this weight lifted off his shoulders now that all the chaos and tension that might have happened while with Stephon Diggs gone is done and over with. So Josh Allen really being perhaps the best fantasy performer at the QB position this weekend kind of came as a surprise, but really isn't all that shocking. It was a very fascinating game against the Arizona Cardinals, and at the end of the day, Josh Allen did what he had to do. 18 of 23, 232 yards, 2 touchdowns, 9 carries for 39 yards as well, 2 touchdowns on the ground for a total of 31.18 fantasy points. This performance is really indicative of Josh Allen just feeling more comfortable. I think that he doesn't necessarily have to force things. Yes, at the beginning of the game, he did have a fumble on the first possession. And later in the game, in his second rushing touchdown, something we might have to look out for. He did injure both his hand and his wrist, had to get it wrapped by athletic training staff. So we're going to have to keep tabs on that, especially because he has a quick turnaround as he's in the Thursday night game against Miami. But overall, this performance really set the standard. Now, in terms of whether he can continue this, it remains to be seen. Obviously, This game coming up Thursday night against the Miami Dolphins will be much more telling. The Dolphins, much better defense than, say, the Cardinals. But the Cardinals did keep them honest in that their offense was able to kind of push Josh Allen to this level. The Cardinals took a very early surprise lead, 17-3, kind of took it and maintained it for most of the game, but in the third quarter, Josh Allen went on a 23-1-3 run with the Buffalo Bills offense, spreading the football around. I believe he hit 8 different receivers. Just goes to show that when you can distribute the ball to a more committed wide receiver room that's not one player, it really allows you to settle into your moments. Now, it's kind of concerning that the run game wasn't part of it because, James Cook is personally on my fantasy team and I wanted to see him have a big day. But they did what they had to do, and Josh Allen was the centerpiece of that. But in terms of surprising performances, and it just may be that this team that he was going up against is that bad, but give it up for Derek Carr, man. Derek Carr did what he had to do, albeit against a Carolina Panthers team that is still one of the worst in the league. He just played his game of football. And the Saints pounded them. And I don't necessarily know whether that's kind of a marker of where the Carolina Panthers are at, more than the Saints being an overall good offense or better than we expected. But Derek Carr showing up and showing out in week 1 has to stand for something, because nobody expected this fantasy performance from him, let alone me. 19 of 23, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, 21.3 fantasy points. It's a pretty solid start. Maybe stream him this week. I don't know, because the Cowboys' defense certainly looks like it's going to be very stellar. Did very well for themselves. And it's going to be a game that he's not expected to perform as well as he did against the Carolina Panthers. But he's in the NFC South, and it's a manageable enough schedule to where you might presume that Derek Carr will have similar games to what he had against the Carolina Panthers. And even though he's not playing them every week, the NFC South has some winnable games in it. And so Derek Carr might be primed for performances where you might be like, hey, if I don't feel confident in, say, my 2 QB league and I want to stream someone or flex someone, Derek Carr might still be available to stream as well. And so Derek Carr, kudos to him. Yes, I'm going to have to see more of a large sample size from him, but at the end of the day, a win is a win. 200 yards and 3 touchdowns is 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, and I'll take them against any team. Another player who, solid citizen always, one of the better fantasy QBs, perhaps one of the better fantasy QBs in that second tier of fantasy QBs that we were talking about before the season start. CJ Stroud, in an interdivisional game, probably going to be one of the more exciting interdivisional games for years to come because of the storylines that it creates. 2 of these guys that came into the league together, and CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson duking it out. Ultimately, CJ Stroud picking up where he left off last year. No signs of a sophomore slump. 234 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 18.66 fantasy points. What I loved about this performance is that he already seemed to have established a rapport with Stephon Diggs. 2 touchdowns to Diggs. That's important because Diggs is the X factor, both positively and negatively, for the Houston Texans. If he's not getting the amount of targets that he wants, then this team might not be able to function like it did last year when CJ Stroud was spreading it around to an unselfish wide receiver room. But if he develops that rapport and this offense is still moving the chains, ticking along, then I think they're fine. And it goes to show that this division will probably bring out the best in CJ Stroud. These kind of rivalries will bring out the best in him. He will relish these moments forever, and he already checkmated Anthony Richardson. So, important divisional win to set the standard that they're still the division favorites. In a close game, developing a rapport with new players, incorporating them into your offense is always a good thing, especially for a sophomore player in his second year like CJ Stroud, who's expected to continue to deliver on this stage. And then another kind of surprise, two surprises to kind of round out this segment. How about Sam Darnold, man? Yes, another kind of player who is going up against a much easier defense to go up against, albeit one with players like Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau. But Sam Darnold, this is perhaps his best game as an NFL player. Going back to his old stomping grounds in New York, where he was drafted into a media-rich environment, perhaps not the best of circumstances for a young player of him. Really struggled. Journeyman guy finds himself in Minnesota. Not projected to be, the week one starter because of all the hype surrounding J.J. McCarthy, maybe. J.J. McCarthy, of course, tears his meniscus, season-ending injury. Sam Darnold, full-time starter. In his first game, he really set the bar high for himself. 19 of 24, 208 yards, 2 TDs, 1 interception, 14.62 fantasy points. And hey, it wasn't all pretty. He definitely has room for improvement. For example, still developing that rapport with Justin Jefferson, albeit Justin Jefferson did have a TD in this game. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is looking for that level of consistency. They're not really asking too much of him in this offense. He has the weapons. We'll see what is happening with Jordan Addison as he tries struggling through an injury. TJ Hawkinson presumptively will be back at least in the next 4 games. So we're going to see how this Minnesota Vikings offense is building. They have a very tough test this week against the San Francisco 49ers. We'll see how Sam Darnold plays against one of his former teams, the most recent team he's been on. But at the end of the day, this game, just a confidence booster, especially in a place where he really did not feel that confident to start off his career as a New York Jet. So kudos to Sam Darnold. And last but not least, perhaps the sneakiest fantasy QB right now, a guy who should be on everyone's radar, Baker Mayfield. Look, a lot of people were probably skeptical about the Bucs coming into the season because they lost the quote-unquote quarterback whisperer in Dave Canales. But look what happened this week. Obviously, they're still working things out in Carolina. I think it will take time for Bryce Young to learn Canales' philosophies. But it's telling that Baker Mayfield had a 289-yard performance with 4 TDs, 29.66 fantasy points. Bryce Young struggled. So at the end of the day, this is really a testament to show how far Baker Mayfield has grown and most importantly how he's matured to be a leader of a team. And it really goes to show that when you have reliable guys in your offense, Mike Evans, 2 touchdowns this game. Even Chris Godwin getting in the fun after somewhat of a down year for him last year. I think that Baker Mayfield right now should be an appealing player to all fantasy football managers, no matter whether you already have him on your radar or maybe thinking about streaming a guy on waivers. So, at the end of the day, Baker Mayfield, perhaps a pretty shock performance to some, but not to most. Because of the fact that I feel that right now, Baker is one of those high-end guys who can really break into any tier at any given time. In the volatility of the NFC South, and in terms of games against competitive NFC teams, like this coming week, a rematch from the NFC divisional game against the Detroit Lions. I think that as these games go on, Baker Mayfield's going to gain more confidence in himself, and we're seeing it pay dividends for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So overall, these guys really are, no matter where they fall on the spectrum, guys who you may be able to trust even more. Even a guy like Derek Carr, maybe, because of the division he plays and the games he will play in the future. But it just goes to show that week 1 is just an amuse-bouche of what's to come for different NFL offenses. Some may succeed, some may falter. And this will be the perfect place to kind of transition to that period. guys who faltered. Because coming up next, we're talking about the QB losers in fantasy this weekend. Guys who weren't up to snuff. We'll be right back to talk about them after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you enjoyed that first segment. Before we get into our second segment of the day here, I do want to remind you yet again to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. Anything you do for the network is greatly appreciated. Also, continue making yourselves available to the many features YouTube has to offer. The Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. Whether it be any questions, comments, or concerns you may have, even tips and donations are appreciated as well. Consider this. The show is always better when you guys are interacting with it. So continue doing what you're doing and we can continue to have fantastic shows with a lot of fun topics. But without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of the day. And we have to talk about some of the fantasy QB losers this week, because there were several. And these guys, whether it be because they're in complicated situations, new offenses, haven't really played in a while, contract situations even, just didn't really play up to or even exceed, if they were more high-end guys, expectations. And so, even though, you always try and find faults in these performances, these are not indictments of these guys. This is week 1 of the NFL season. These are just guys who, coming into the season, being talked about, and what situations they were in leading up to this point more specifically, did not deliver. They still have 16 games left to do that. So, these week 1 losers can quickly turn into fantasy winners, in my opinion. I believe that will happen. But for now, these guys simply did not live up to par or perform up to par this week. So without further ado, let's talk about them. Starting off with the most obvious one. The number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. The guy who everyone expects to be the franchise QB of the Chicago Bears. Obviously getting off to a very rough start. Didn't even get over 93 yards. Somehow still got the win, as the Chicago Bears became only the 3rd team in NFL history to win a game without scoring an offensive touchdown, and that is Caleb Williams. Now, I can understand why a lot of people will say, well, he probably wasn't going to live up to expectations in his first game in the NFL, because a lot of rookies don't. But, as I was learning this weekend, a lot of the best didn't have big games. Peyton Manning, Joe Montana, for Burrow and CD, 2 QB, 3 flex PPR. His other QBs are Tua and Geno. Other wide receivers are Chase, Terry McLaurin, Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, A.D. Mitchell. Running backs Josh Jacobs, Ezekiel Elliott, Tank Bigsby, Jordan Mason, Bucky Irving. A very young team, very interesting young team. A lot of room for improvement, a lot of exciting guys with a lot of exciting storylines. The trait Mahomes, Debo, Waddle for Burrow and CD. Now, I believe in this system, you can use 4 QBs, 2 on your bench and 2 starting, because why would you be trading these guys away when you already have a 2 QB setup? And 3 flex obviously helps in terms of PPR as well. So Mahomes obviously still is considered the QB1. For Burrow, it's an interesting kind of trade. I still would keep Mahomes. Debo and Waddle are interesting because Debo kind of is losing his luster as a wide receiver on the San Francisco 49ers. He's either going to have a crazy game where he's over 100 yards receiving, or he's going to take a back seat to Brandon Ayuk, especially now that Ayuk has his whole contract deal figured out. And then Jalen Waddle, hearing me personally, he's disappointing. So those are 2 guys I want to focus on this trade. Mahomes, not so much. For Burrow and CD, don't necessarily have